Welcome back, movie buffs. In this video, we're going to touch on almost 50 movies that were just recently added to Prime Video, including some recently released action movies, comedies, classics, and a whole bunch of horror, and some brand new releases coming to Prime later this month. They've even added a big batch of DC movies, including some great ones like The Batman, which I loved, even if it did rip off David Fincher's style. Joker, which I loved even more, maybe specifically because they ripped off Martin Scorsese's style from Taxi Driver and the story from Scorsese's The King of Comedy. They've also just added Black Adam, which I hesitated to even include here because I do not recommend it. As much as I want to like The Rock, I just felt like this was a misfire in way too many directions. They also added Wonder Woman 1984, which I hated so much I made a long video about it, which is something I never do. I mean, really, if you want to watch a DC movie set in the 80s, just watch Tim Burton's original Batman from 1989. They've also added that to Prime Video, along with Super Pets, which is a really funny movie for the family, and a handful of other DC-related movies, The Watchmen being one of my personal favorites out of the bunch. If that's not enough action for you, Amazon also added one of my longtime favorite action movies to recommend here on the channel, and I don't see it available on streaming often, Running Scared, starring Paul Walker, which is a wild, fast-paced thriller with plenty of flair to spare. You get a surprisingly intense performance from Paul Walker, and honestly, more variety than you typically get from a movie like this, making it one of my top picks for the month, even though this is one of the best months for Prime Video I've seen in over 6 years of recommending movies on YouTube. They've also added Robert Rodriguez's Desperado, another top pick for me, and quite possibly his best film of all time. Out of everything getting added this month, I consider Desperado to be one of the most rewatchable. Remember the 5th of November? For two reasons. One, it happens to be my birthday, and two, it's a famous line from V for Vendetta, also included with Prime right now. I would consider this to be the third coolest movie ever made by the Wachowskis, right behind The Matrix and Bound. As a matter of fact, Bound is included with Prime Video, at least it is here in the US, but they didn't just add it, so it doesn't make the list. Still, a strong recommendation from me on that one. Face Off is still somehow a totally badass action movie, even though the performances from Cage and Travolta are both way over the top, and John Woo's directing style is in full throttle. It really is too much, and I love Face Off for that. They added a whole bunch of Jason Bourne movies, which are great, but they omitted the best one, The Bourne Ultimatum, the third one in the series. So if you want to rewatch the series, you'd actually have to pay to watch the best one. And then they also didn't add the new one with Matt Damon, just titled Bourne, which I thought was maybe one of the weaker ones, if not the worst of the entire series, so they can keep that one. Anaconda has become a classic monster movie. It's silly, but don't forget, not only is J-Lo in this, but you've also got Owen Wilson before he was pretty famous, Ice Cube, and Jon Voight playing a pretty decent bad guy, even if it's kind of a cartoonish one. I still love all of those elements with this one, and it really is still, to this day, a pretty fun watch. Same goes for Red Dawn. They've actually added the original 80s version here, not the terrible remake that completely missed the point of the movie. Now, they have added a ton of horror movies, but I'm going to save those for later because we're not quite to October, but they've also added The Army of Darkness, which is a fantastic horror comedy. And honestly, I included it in the comedy section of this video because it plays out much more like a comedy. And even though this is the third installment in the Evil Dead trilogy, you could watch this by itself and it would make a fantastic Halloween watch.
They live. They breathe. They suck. Army of Darkness.
Some of you may have noticed I'm going gray pretty early for a 38-year-old, but my hair, unfortunately, is also starting to thin, which has been a big bummer for me because until just recently, I didn't think there was anything I could do about it, but today's sponsor, MD Hair, has recently come to the rescue. Now, I don't think I'm losing my hair, but I do have thin hair in my family, and I don't want to be a 40-year-old with thin white hair. But after taking the quiz over at MD Hair and submitting a scalp sample, I received a customized hair treatment program that is all natural. MD Hair actually uses AI technology to analyze photos of your scalp and your quiz answers to customize these kits for you. And you get everything you need in one kit, whether it's stuff to begin hair growth or stop hair loss. MD Hair can also help heal your scalp and make your hair stronger and healthier with just a handful of products, and it's stuff you're already using like shampoo, conditioner, a topical serum, and even supplements. In fact, I've been taking a collagen supplement from my MD Hair kit, and I just add it to my coffee every morning, and not only does my hair feel healthier and stronger than it really has in a long time, but my skin feels better too. So customize your hair growth treatment with MD Hair and use my promo code FLICK70 to get your first month of customized products at 70% off. That might actually be the biggest discount a sponsor has ever passed on to my audience. It's a fantastic deal, and again, to get it, go to mdhair.co or use the link in the description and use my promo code FLICK70 to get that 70% off deal. But speaking of great stuff, let's talk about the rest of the movies on this list.
No need to thank me. I'm just a guy with a gun. Pow, pow, pow.
They're also adding Observe and Report starring Seth Rogen, but it's worth noting this was directed by Jody Hill, who does a lot of work with Danny McBride, so if you're a fan of Danny McBride stuff, things like The Righteous Gemstones, then the extremely dry humor in Observe and Report should be right up your alley. By a quick show of hands, who knows what a triple Lindy is? If you don't, you may need to go, not back to school, but go watch Back to School starring Rodney Dangerfield. This movie also features a very early role from Robert Downey Jr., so much so that I say big fans of Robert Downey Jr., you owe it to yourself to watch what he does in Back to School. And then longtime subscribers know I don't recommend romantic comedies often. I consider them to be very repetitive, but they're adding an excellent one this month, She's Out of My League. And the star here, Jay Baruchel, actually makes this movie work really well, not just because I like his character, but the setup here is fantastic. He falls in love with a total 10, and it's just about this sort of average, or maybe even slightly below average guy trying to date this knockout of a woman. And the movie's got some great scenes. It makes for a fantastic date night movie.
Pleasure? Nope.
But because this is Flick Connection and a lot of you come here for lesser known movies or movies you may have missed, some of the deeper cuts that they're adding this month include The Hunt, starring Mads Mikkelsen. This one is in mixed language, so you will have to read subtitles for most of it, but in this movie he plays a primary school teacher who gets accused of sexual assault. Now the way it is set up, you're fairly certain he did not do what he's accused of. However, what you see is the community close in on him, and you see how horrible an accusation like that could be. So it's high drama stuff, and honestly, I don't know that this would have worked without a real killer actor like Mikkelsen. One of Jake Gyllenhaal's earliest movies, where he's still a teenager, is titled October Sky. This is an excellent period piece. He actually plays a young man growing up in a coal mining community, and he's expected to go work in the mines as well, except he's got his eyes on the sky. He wants to be involved in space exploration. It's based on a true story. It's fairly slow paced in sort of an old-fashioned way, but still an excellent movie that is family friendly. If you're a big fan of The Princess Bride and you somehow have never seen the movie Stardust, congratulations, it's going to be one of your new favorite movies. It's an incredible fantasy movie with a lot of great humor. This is actually an early movie from director Matthew Vaughn, who would go on to do X-Men First Class, Kick-Ass, and The Kingsman. I'm a big fan of the way he handles these big, elaborate action sequences, and Stardust is honestly one of my favorite movies of his. If you're in the mood for some cult classic, campy fun, I recommend Death Race 2000.
The year 2000. America is a vast speedway. People line the streets to witness the greatest drivers on Earth in a race from sea to shining sea.
This is a death race.
This actually stars David Carradine and Sylvester Stallone. He's in kind of a small role, but it's a silly one. This takes place in the future. There's this race across the country. The more people you hit along your way, the more points you get. It's wild stuff like that. Weird cars, weirder costumes. And as cheesy as the movie is, it does have some cool elements as well, meaning there's more meat on the bone here than just the campiness. The Machinist, starring Christian Bale, is the movie he famously lost a ton of weight for. If you never saw this one, but you enjoy The Twilight Zone or anything in that genre, I highly recommend The Machinist. I could say the same thing about Europa Report, which is a slow burn but has some really interesting elements in it and is technically a found footage movie, where you actually follow a manned spacecraft on its maiden voyage to one of the moons of Jupiter, named Europa. And while this is not an action sci-fi movie, it's much more of a mystery story. It's very compelling, especially for something done on such a low budget. And then finally, in the deep cut or hidden gem section, I've got one for the art film crowd. Koyaanisqatsi, I think I'm saying that right, is sort of a documentary, except it's really just footage from all over the world set to original music by Philip Glass. So if you like the sound of his music and some of the shots I'm showing you here, this is actually kind of an amazing movie, except there's literally no dialogue, no explanation. It's much more of a cinematic experience than anything else, but still a highly recommended one. Now, if you enjoy getting movie recommendations like these, why not let the algorithm know by clicking the like button? Maybe even click that subscribe button if you'd like to see my content again. If you do neither of those things, then this could be the last time you ever see me. For some classics, they're adding 2001: A Space Odyssey, one of Kubrick's best films. I just recently rewatched it. It is a movie I watch every couple of years or so, and I will say it is unlike any other movie in existence. It's got a completely different pace and really needs to be viewed very differently than any other movie. It requires quite a bit of patience, and in my opinion, you need to be very interested in all the little details Kubrick puts in there. This is one of those movies, if you're just waiting for something to happen, you will be sorely disappointed. If you go into it expecting a new, fresh experience, and consider the fact that this movie came out almost a full decade before Star Wars, it's easily one of the most mind-blowing movies ever made in more ways than one. Another mind-blowing classic is Memento, another movie I just watched last week. I've loved this one since it first came out, and it still holds up. One of the things I noticed on my recent rewatch is how tightly written every single scene is. I mean, you could take almost any scene out of context in this movie, and it's got its own unique little mystery to solve. One more piece of the puzzle along the way. It's so well crafted, it's no question why Christopher Nolan has such a stellar career. For those of you that either miss Johnny Depp or cocaine, they're adding Blow, one of my favorite cocaine movies ever made. I mean, there's a handful of solid ones, but Blow is pretty exceptional, and not just because of Johnny Depp. Penelope Cruz is also really amazing in this movie, as well as all the secondary characters. They're really well fleshed out and interesting to watch, making this one of the more rewatchable movies on the list. And then one of my favorite sci-fi movies from the 21st century so far, Children of Men. Now, while this was a very well-reviewed movie, I think that it dissolves cult status, and it just doesn't have it yet. Not only is the story incredibly well told, the movie's well acted, the cinematography in this movie is incredible. I mean, every frame of the movie feels authentic, yet it doesn't really take place in our reality. This is kind of a dystopian future that's unfolding, and the movie is just solid from beginning to end. But the storytelling here is top-notch, and I'm telling you, if it's been a while since you've seen it, or maybe you only saw it the one time, I want you to pay attention to multiple scenes in the movie, including this one, and the final shootout sequence. They're both done as one long take, and they're absolutely packed with action and effects. Not only is it a great feat of filmmaking, but it does such an amazing job of putting you in the place of the protagonist in this movie. But if you're just in the mood for sort of a throwback 90s sex thriller, they've got the ultimate 90s throwback sex thriller, Wild Things. Now, some of you may pick Basic Instinct or Fatal Attraction. Two very good movies. I would even say they're maybe better than Wild Things, but Wild Things is not only a wild movie, but they really dial up the sex in this one and the humor. You've got Bill Murray playing an ambulance chaser, and more twists and turns than those other two movies combined. Again, not necessarily making it a better movie, but it does make it sort of the ultimate 90s sex thriller. A genre that just doesn't really exist anymore. All right, now we're on to the horror category where they've added a ton of stuff in preparation for Halloween. Then we'll talk about the new releases that they're adding later on in September. One of my favorite horror comedies, though, is Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. This is an excellent Halloween watch, especially for horror fans. It takes so many things that you've seen in horror movies too many times and turns them into fantastic comedy set pieces. There's plenty of gore and blood in this one to make it a fun Halloween watch, but it's seldom off-putting in this movie as it's always played for comedy. Drag Me to Hell is actually directed by Sam Raimi, who did the original Evil Dead trilogy, and it's probably the best horror movie he did following that trilogy. Just like the Evil Dead, it's loaded with practical effects. Some of them are really fun, but others are incredibly creepy in this movie. Even though there's fun, campy elements to Drag Me to Hell, just like there are with the Evil Dead series, this one's laced with a bit more dread than I feel like the Evil Dead series is. Some of you, I'm sure, will argue with me on that one, but go back and rewatch this one over Halloween. One of the most bone-chilling vampire movies I've ever seen actually comes from Sweden and has turned into quite the cult classic over the years, Let the Right One In. They made an American remake titled Let Me In, which I think is one of the better American horror remakes to have ever been made, but the original still holds up incredibly well. The cinematography is fantastic, and the story, as chilling as it can be, it's also pretty touching at times as well, making this a really unique watch. I know the found footage horror movie genre has been pretty well played out, but one of the best I've seen over the past decade is As Above, So Below. You start off following a small group of people exploring the catacombs, but then this turns almost into like an Indiana Jones level horror movie. Being found footage, you don't get the great cinematography you would normally get, but it does feel like it's really happening, and the handheld, low-budget style actually causes some of the effects they created to be really jarring, and it's a fantastic watch that just got overlooked again because that genre is just pretty played out. If you felt that way and you skipped it, trust me, it's really fantastic. The Sacrament is loosely based on the Jonestown Massacre. In fact, it's so close to the real events, they could have really just made a Jonestown movie. I don't know if there were legal issues with that. As it stands though, this is the closest thing we have to a movie depicting the Jonestown Massacre. And on top of that, you get actor Gene Jones, who's most known for his famous scene in No Country for Old Men. He does an amazing job of playing a cult leader in this movie. They're also adding Red Eye, which stars Cillian Murphy, and Rachel McAdams. This was actually directed by Wes Craven and is easily his best movie since Scream. I wouldn't say it's as good, it's a little bit basic, and you see some twists and turns coming, but if you're a fan of either of those actors, this will make a fun horror movie watch if nothing else. We already mentioned Army of Darkness, but they've also added the Evil Dead remake, which is not campy and fun, and even though it uses loads and almost exclusively uses practical effects, they're incredibly terrifying in the new remake. Now, this isn't the newest one that just hit theaters this year, rather it came out about 10 years ago, and is still just an incredibly terrifying horror movie that goes way over the top in one of the best ways possible. But seriously, if you're a scaredy cat and you don't really like horror movies, steer far clear of Evil Dead. They're also adding The Ring and Mama, two kind of by-the-book horror movies that are elevated because they were done by some exceptional directors. But it is worth noting they're also adding a bunch of classic monster movies like the original Dracula, Invisible Man, Wolfman, The Mummy, and some of the sequels. The original movies are great, they make fantastic watches today, but if nothing else, they would also be great to just put on in the background during Halloween. Now, all of those were just added on September 1st. They're available right now. The full list of all the movies can be found in the top pinned comment down below, not the video description. But later in the month, on September 12th, they're adding a new release movie starring Willem Dafoe and only Willem Dafoe in Inside. Now, this is for the art film crowd. In fact, there's quite a bit of commentary on art itself in this movie. But Dafoe plays an art thief who breaks into this swanky apartment to steal some priceless pieces when he becomes trapped and cannot escape. It is all metaphorical. It should be pretty obvious that a guy could eventually figure out how to get out of this place. But once you get the metaphor, then a lot of the things that unfold in the story are actually really interesting. It's a pretty cool, cerebral movie, yet I do not recommend this one for mass audiences because I can guarantee you a lot of you will be disappointed with it. But Guy Ritchie recently released a real crowd pleaser. In fact, they actually titled it Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. This movie actually shared a lot in common with one of my favorite Vietnam-era movies, Uncommon Valor, which stars Gene Hackman. And just like Uncommon Valor, Jake Gyllenhaal plays a guy who's going back into a war zone to try to rescue a fellow soldier. Now, while this is not based directly on a true story, it feels very much like one, and things like this did happen and really, honestly, still happen with all the wars going on around the world. That said, I thought it was an incredible movie. I thought it didn't feel like a Guy Ritchie movie at all, which I think is why his name is in the title. If you like any kind of military, war, modern warfare movies, The Covenant is easily one of the best to have been released in recent memory. And it will be available on Prime on September 22nd. I highly recommend it. Hopefully you find some great stuff to watch on this list, but I will keep making these episodes as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Prime Video episode, and you will see me on the next one.